Prosciutto. Prosciutto. I'm Joan Acocella. I'm a staff writer at The New Yorker, and welcome to the 11th Annual New Yorker Festival. First of all, please turn off every cell phone, and there's no flash photography. These are my colleagues. The first is Matt Reeves, right here. He began making movies at the age of 8 with a wind-up camera. His official directorial debut in film came when he was still in his 20s with The Pallbearer. Since then, he's done several successful TV series, Relativity, Homicide, Life on the Street, and Felicity. And also an early horror film, Cloverdale, which was shot on cell phones. Shot to look as though it was shot on cell phones, right?
Shot on a Handycam, Cloverfield, it was called.
What did I say? Cloverdale. Forgive me.
That's all right.
Forgive me. On Monday, Matt's Let Me In was released, and that is his version of what was 2 years ago a very popular Swedish movie, Let the Right One In. And we're going to see a bit of it in a minute. Melissa Rosenberg, screenwriter and producer from Los Angeles, co-producer and writer of The O.C., producer and co-producer of 36 episodes of Dexter, the very popular Dexter about a serial killer who only kills killers. She wrote the movie Step Up. Notably for us today, she's written the first 3 episodes of Twilight, based on Stephenie Meyer's series of Twilight novels, Twilight, New Moon, and Eclipse. And she will also be writing the film version of the last novel, which is being split into 2 movies, right? Next is Stephen King, probably the premier horror meister in our country, although he's written other kinds of novels as well, plus nonfiction, notably a study of horror movies called Danse Macabre. He's a screenwriter as well, for example, for the film of his own Salem's Lot, of which we will see a little clip. Stephen was born and in some measure raised in Maine, and for a lot of us, I believe, what we know of Maine is what we know from your books. Are you popular at home? I imagine actually you are.
It depends on who you ask.
That's right. Stephen's first novel was Carrie. His second novel was Salem's Lot, and his third was The Shining. So he's done okay. By my count, he's published 49 novels. Recently, he had a foray into comic books, and we'll see a few pages from that. Last is Noël Carroll, Distinguished Professor of Philosophy at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. His specialty is aesthetics, philosophy of art, and most of his books have been on that subject, especially the art of film. Along the way, he picked up another PhD in film studies. His best-known book is probably The Philosophy of Horror from 1990, so he's going to be useful to us. So that's it for my colleagues up here, and let me see if I'm supposed to tell you something. The last thing I'm supposed to tell you is that there'll be a 15 to 20-minute Q&A at the end. All right. There's a big vampire revival right now. Vampires, if you define vampire as the undead, as you know, there are many other qualities that have since accrued to the character. But if you define the vampire as the undead, someone who comes back from death to haunt the living, then vampires have probably been with us since the beginning of history. But they have, like any long surviving theme in our culture, it has big times and down times. Right now is a big time. There are very important important and extremely popular movies out there, such as the Twilight series, a very popular TV program, True Blood. Just a month ago, there was a big series of horror films at the BAM Cinematheque. There's now a comic book series. Vampires are everywhere. There's a new edition of Bram Stoker's Dracula, in some measure the mother of us all. And so vampires are in vogue. And so my first question is for Stephen. Why do you think people are especially interested now?
Well, I think people have always been interested in vampires, and I think in a lot of ways that Twilight drove the revival of interest, because certainly there were millions of people that turned on to that series even before they became movies.
I want to say to you guys that I'd be happy if you jump. Most of my questions will be for one of you specifically. But if you want to jump in after the person to whom I've addressed the question, please do. All right? So don't rudely interrupt. But please contribute, because I'd like to hear from all of you.
I would add, actually, that I think it's the very sort of times in which it becomes popular again. It's always driven by a writer who in this case it was Stephenie Meyer, and before that it was Joss Whedon with Buffy, and then before that it was Anne Rice, and and whoever, the creator of the mythology, who takes the mythology and reinvents it, gives it something new and fresh that just introduces it to a younger audience, and so then they get into it. So it's always like taking sort of, the Bram Stoker mythology and expanding on it and bringing something new to it. And I think that every time someone does that, it just revives it.
Yeah, I think that in terms of the present manifestation, that vampires embody this kind of ambivalence about mortality. They show you the good and the bad side of mortality. I think in this context, it's interesting that we have so many good vampires. Starting
I'm
with
getting
Angel.
there.
We start with Angel, and we've got Edward and Bill.
And sexy vampires.
And that seems to me to a certain extent withdraw the negative part from the vampire. We're more interested in contemplating immortality. It's not as frightening as it is in other vampire kinds of cycles. And I think that's interesting, because there's so much now about cloning and the possibility of making our genome eternal. There's, of course, in my generation, the denial of aging, the desire to stay young. And I think maybe our good vampires now, the ones that live on plasma, stay virgins, that those vampires are encouraging us in the fantasy of eternal life.
There's a real, to me, the other part of this, the other piece of the puzzle is there's also been a Living Dead revival. Zombies are big, so you've got this kind of Christian thing that's going on. You've got take this, eat, this is my flesh, that's the zombie part, and then this is my blood, that's the vampire part. And so my son, who writes under the name Joe Hill, was asking me the other day if there was nobody left but the vampires and the zombies, who would win? I said, well, probably the Living Dead, because they use the whole thing.
Right. Instead of just the neck.
I think you just named a franchise.
In relation to what Noel said about immortality, a name that hasn't been mentioned yet is that of Anne Rice. And I do believe we hear a lot from Lestat about how sad it is not to be able to die like the rest of you. Grass is always greener, right? Well, as Noel mentioned, there's been a change recently in vampires. Not entirely, but we're now getting nice vampires and also sexy vampires. So we had, by the way, none of this is new. It's just a question of a trend. We had Angel in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. In Twilight, we have Edward, who's considered a very serious dreamboat. There's also Bill in True Blood. And I think both Bill and Edward drink Japanese synthetics. Does Edward?
No, he drinks animals.
He drinks animals. Okay, but Bill occasionally lapses, but mostly he drinks Japanese synthetics. And even more notably, the vampire in Let Me In is a child, and a very appealing child. Little strange, but and could kill you, but very lovable. Stephen has remarked on this and said, you sort of want to pet them and take them home. Since you did the child,
yeah.
So why do we have this trend toward the nice vampire?
Gosh, I don't know. You know, it's interesting because in Lindquist's story, I don't know that she is she nice? I guess what I liked about what his story was and the way he was using it, because obviously there's a kind of great romanticization in a lot of the stories you're describing. And Lindquist is different in that it's a child, but also he's using the vampire myth to talk about the pain of adolescence. And I think the way in which you're drawn to her is you feel her loneliness and her burden. And obviously it's a burden to be a vampire, but there isn't really anything glamorous for her. But I think that you can connect to her vulnerability, actually. And that is sort of a tragic aspect of her character.
Yes. Now that we've talked a little bit about the range of vampires, I'd like to show you a brief DVD that concerns that range, or it concerned it when I put it together. It also concerned showing you a little sample of all these people's work. And also, but it'll begin with two of my favorite vampires, and my guess is there are a lot of people's favorite vampires. Bela Lugosi from the Todd Browning film from 1931.
I never drink.
That line actually was put in by the writers of the Todd Browning film. It is not in Dracula. By the way, do you know who we're talking about when we talk about Bram Stoker? As I said, it's not the mother of us all, because there were very, very important vampires in the early 19th century. But Bram Stoker, who was a theater manager who wrote horror novels in his spare time, his fourth novel, 1897, was Dracula. And many many vampires since then, not the cute ones, have been based on this Dracula. But he is famously Bela Lugosi, who thereafter had a hard time getting a different kind of job, and the second one at the beginning that's not representative of our friend's work is one of my favorite vampires, Klaus Kinski from Werner Herzog's Nosferatu. So could we roll the DVD, please? In the last, please notice the sexiness. It's a subject we'll come back to, and a very important one. Melissa, how do you reconcile? Yours must be the most dreamboat vampire out there at the moment. How do you, as a writer, how do you reconcile the charm of the new vampire with his vampirehood, his dangerousness?
Well, he rejects his vampirehood. I mean, that's what he refuses to be that. And he also has a great deal of self-loathing about it. So he's a rather tortured character himself. But he is, that appeal, what makes him, I think, so sexy, maybe a lot of the sexier vampires, is it's on some level it's actually very safe because of his own morality, his own, and so he has this incredible desire for her, and yet it's this sort of, come close but not too close, and so there's a safety to him.
Yes, is that why you introduced Jacob, the sexy werewolf?
Well, he's a little more hot-tempered and flares, and is a little less controlled. But he too both of them have the balance of both danger and safety, which makes it that much more, I think, it allows particularly young audiences, but I think, female audiences certainly to really give themselves over to their attraction for this type of a character, this particular actor, or this particular role, because there is when you're safe, you can surrender totally, and yet there's still the very sexy danger. Both have that a bit of a bad boy.
Is there something parallel here about trying to maintain abstinence in the face of sexual attraction with his not wanting to suck her blood?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these, I'm calling them good vampires, and I also think of like the vampire in the novel Sunshine. They project an image of a kind of lost soul, and the women make it their mission to redeem them and save them. And I think that's another aspect of the attractiveness, that this is someone you can work on.
But I think that's true of Edward. Even the pallor, the sad voice, leaving you was the hardest thing I ever had to do. And then the contrast, as I'm sure a lot of you know, he has a competitor in Eclipse, which is the man I just mentioned, or the wolf I just mentioned, Jacob. There's a moment in the movie, I remember very vividly, where Bella is in danger of dying of cold. And Jacob says, and Jacob and Edward are both there looking daggers at each other. And Jacob says, well, I'm going to lie down with her because whatever else you are, I'm hotter than you. And it seemed to me that every teenage girl in the audience, either moaned or yelped or laughed or something like this. But it made a big impression.
There's one moment in Let Me In where the girl, Amy, right?
Abby.
Abby.
Yeah.
She's attracted to Owen's blood.
That she's what? Oh, she's attracted to his blood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he shows it to her.
Yeah, it was a mistake.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, he cuts his thumb, I think.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Be best friends.
But he thinks they're going to make a blood pact.
Brothers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you describe the moment, very touching and funny, when she crawls into bed with him?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the thing about it is that, Abby has this sort of caretaker that Richard Jenkins plays. And, she's just lost him in the scene prior to that. And there's a question about, Owen is interested in, he's coming of age, and he's looking out into the world around him, the world of adults, and there's a kind of curiosity with sexuality. And so when she climbs into bed after this sort of tragedy, she's covered with blood. And one of the tenets of the vampire mythology is that a vampire must be invited in. And so
that's what the title is about, right?
That's what Let Me In, Let the Right One is about. And actually, I was communicating with Linguist about this because there's another scene too later where he finally is so upset with her once he discovers what she is that he says, well, why do I have to invite you in? Why can't you just come in? And she comes in and she bleeds through all of her pores. And I was talking to Linguist about this because to me this scene is very emotional in the story. And I was saying, well, what does that mean to you? And he was saying, well, on the one hand, frankly, he said he couldn't resist the idea of actually that's sort of such a tenet, you know, and he was like, but what a great opportunity, as much as it's about character, just to have a vampire come in uninvited and actually see what will happen if they're not invited. It's not just politeness. But it really is, in the case of, in that particular scene, that scene is all about her putting herself at his mercy and becoming vulnerable. In the scene you're talking about, it's one of the first times you hear reference of it. She actually, when she's talking to Jenkins, he's just poured acid over his face. His vocal cords are completely destroyed. And she asks if she can come in, and he can't speak to her. So instead, they end up with having what is a very sad goodbye in the hospital window. And then she leaves. He offers himself to her, sort of one last gesture of sacrifice. And she sucks his blood. So when she shows up at Owen's bedroom in the middle of the night, and he has no idea what she is. In fact, he has no friends at all, and this is the one person in the world that he is connected to. She shows up at the window, and she has to ask to be let in, but she's also covered in blood. So she has to strip off of her clothes because she's covered in blood, doesn't want to get blood in his bed, asks him not to look at her. He does invite her in, but there's this question of sexuality, and the story is really a coming-of-age story. But the scene, it's interesting, because people were, when we were shooting it, they were saying, well, is this scene going to be too provocative? And I said, well, it's ironic, because to me it's the most innocent scene in the entire film.
Yes.
Because she gets into bed, and they're lying next to each other. She's completely naked, and he's shocked. And he says, you're not wearing anything. And she says, well, is that gross? And he says, no. And then he asks her to be his girlfriend. But it becomes very clear, even though, as we were discussing earlier, he is interested in sexuality, but there's a level at which he's still a complete innocent and doesn't understand it at all. And then she's like, well, why can't we just keep things the way they are? She's worried about what the implication is of them going steady, actually, is what he's asking. And he's really hurt because she doesn't really want to be his girlfriend. And then she realizes that she's hurt him, and she says, well, okay, well, then you know, what would it mean and what we have to do? And he's basically like, well, it's just the same.
You just do the same thing.
So the implication is, even though there's this kind of sexual situation that seems to be presenting itself, that these are, in a way, to innocence. And that's one of the interesting things about Lindquist's story, is it mixes, in talking about vampirism as a sort of metaphor for like a painful childhood, he's also talking about the idea, this juxtaposition of tones, that on the one hand, there's this kind of pure innocent side, and on the other hand, this is the time in your life when, you know, your darker impulses, you're starting to sort of be formed. Even the idea of vampirism and losing control of your body is almost like on the cusp of adolescence, when your body sort of threatens to lose control, and the idea of breaking out and your teeth coming out and new teeth coming in. And so I found that was fascinating about Lindquist's story.
Yeah, very poignant scene.
There's a real sort of teenage charm to vampire stories, too. The sex is all oral sex. You don't have to worry about getting it up, if I can be vulgar, because, you know, you're basically going to bite the girl's neck. You get to go out all night long. You can sleep all day. It's a teenager's dream. Right?
Drinking.
You drink it. Drinking. And you stay 17 forever. And to a lot of people, I think that would be fairly attractive. But there's also this terrible moment in True Blood where this girl who's been turned into a vampire as a virgin finally has sex and discovers that each time she has sex is the first time, because everything goes right back to the way that it was, and that the experience is always going to be painful. And I thought, geez, you know, who thinks of this?
Yeah.
It was a great moment.
It was. It's very original. And,
totally. Yeah.
Well, she should have talked to that vampire in Interview for the Vampire, who is very angry because she'll never get to have sex.
Yeah.
Noel, something you discuss in the philosophy of horror, which I think is something that interests all of us, is why we would pay good money to be scared. And what is our motivation for liking horror movies?
Well, I think, first of all, we have it almost genetically. I mean, if you think about it, humans, for most of our existence, have been prey. It's only recently, maybe the last 2 centuries in some places, that we've become the prime predators. So we're really sensitive to being prey. The other thing to realize is if you can get an emotion without having to pay the price, It's exhilarating. So, you know, people like melodramas. They like to have a good cry. They like to be sad, as long as they don't have to suffer loss. I think with horror, you enjoy being frightened, as long as there's no danger. So I think that the fact that we have a sort of genetic preoccupation with being chased and being prey, along with the fact that the reaction to that can be a real adrenaline high, if we don't have to pay the price for it. If we don't have to pay the price for the emotion, we'll pay the ticket for the emotion.
Interesting.
Stephen, could you, you've talked in various places about the politics of horror, of the horror genre, and have said that it was, you said, as conservative as a banker. And
I'm sorry?
You've said that the politics of horror literature and horror movies are quite conservative. As conservative as a banker, you said.
Right.
And you've also said that horror makes people feel comfortable. So the way sometimes right-wing politics will. Can you tell us why and how? And
Certainly not to me.
I'm not sure that I can. A lot of what I do is intuitive, and it exists at almost a subconscious level. I'm convinced that's how Stoker wrote Dracula, that a lot of it was stuff that was coming up from inside, and that a lot of the really good horror fiction almost bypasses every part of the brain except the vocabulary. But I do think that there's a book by John Wyndham called Rebirth, and it takes place after a nuclear war, and the human strain no longer breeds true. Most of the babies are born deformed and die. And they've worked out their own kind of makeshift eugenics, where people who are okay mate with other people who are okay, and they have little plaques in their houses that say, "Blessed be the norm." And that could almost be the motto of the horror movie. You know, we look at people who are ugly, who are horrible, who are psychotic, who are different from us, basically. And we want to see those people exterminated. It varies from movie to movie. In a movie like King Kong, I don't know about anybody else here. I saw King Kong when I was 9, and I cried when he fell off the Empire State Building, man. I felt like, stop shooting him. You guys, quit it. And I mean, a kid at 9, you don't think, well, all right, we'll quit it. He'll come down and stomp the rest of New York. You don't think of it that way. The same thing is true with some of the other brainless monsters, but with the vampires, with Christopher Lee and Bela Lugosi, people like that. I always felt like, or Mr. Barlow in Salem's Lot, that you just want to kill them so that life can go back to 2 cars in the garage and a suburban house, and we can have things nice, especially since we've seen how bad things are with these creatures. So yeah, I think that there's a real conservative element there. You have to keep in mind, though, that I wrote that book before the sort of boom years of Freddy and Jason and Jigsaw and people like that. And there's something really bizarre happens there, is the monster becomes your pal in this funny way. Freddy ceases to be. The first Nightmare on Elm Street movie is terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. These people wake up and he still won't go. It's every child's nightmare, every adult's nightmare. The dream ends, but the nightmare doesn't. But then, little by little, you just say, you know, Freddy starts to get some witty lines, you know. And, he's sharpening his nails, and you say, yeah, Freddy, you go with your bad self.
You know, it is a trajectory very often when a monster catches on. It gets nicer and nicer. So in the Godzilla series, when the first Godzilla is sort of, you know, emulsified at the end, when he comes back and he more often than not is the savior of Tokyo. I mean, he has to knock it down to get rid of some other monster. So there's still destruction, but he's on our side. He has little kids who are his friends.
You've worked on Dexter as well as Twilight, and there's almost like an analog there in the sense that Dexter is the nice serial killer. And he's not a guy that you hate and get to like. He's a guy you like from the beginning.
Right. What's also
And he works
fun.
with blood.
Exactly. Yeah, there's always that tie-in between the two. What's also fun to work on Dexter, one of the reasons was that character, people often mistake him for being a vigilante. You know, as he kills to rid the world of bad people. And so you can become invested in him. And you know, like, yeah, go kill that asshole, he's evil, you know, and you're out there rooting for him. And then when he actually performs the murder, it turns around and you realize, he just likes to kill people. And it's you know, hopefully at his best, it would be a mirror to its audience of this is, you know, that same emotion was within you, and hopefully you have better intentions, but, you know.
Melissa, you're, of all of us up here, I think, you're the one who has had to make a screenplay out of a well-known source, where somebody might say to themselves, oh, she changed this.
They say it all
yes.
the time.
So tell us about, to what extent did you change vampirism? And, you know, what were your conflicts over that? Because you said, as you say, some people are going to say, what do you mean, Edward, blah, 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 you know?
Yeah, you know, I didn't, the thing that I stayed true to was a mythology. I really stayed very closely to that in the book, because I think that is, you know, Stephanie created this world and this mythology, and it's very intricately laid out for all 4 books. And the characters of the vampires were actually, they're very, aside from certain scenes or moments, you know, they're pretty close to the book. The thing I changed, actually, probably more than anything, was the character of Bella, the people around them. And,
how did you change Bella?
In the book, she's a much more reactive character, and you know, you can do that in a novel. You can have a very reactive character and have it be very compelling. In a film, your lead has to drive the action, has to drive the movie, and so I made her a much more active. You know, if there was a scene in the book in which she was reacting to Edward and Jacob, blah, blah, I actually had her push that scene forward. So she's, and I think as portrayed by Kristen Stewart, she's just a stronger character, and it was also important to all of us involved, but certainly to me, that if she's going to be seen by a lot of young girls, I wanted her to be a strong role model, as strong as I could make her.
Yeah.
So, and I think Kristen has really brought a lot to that as well.
It seems to be one thing that you did shift somewhat is you said make her stronger. Seems to me she's much more sexually assertive in the movie. No?
Actually, no.
All right.
She's
maybe it was just
pretty randy in that book, I gotta tell you. It's she's
no, but
all over Edward.
she keeps asking him, you know, or saying to him, let's do it. And
I didn't make that up.
Isn't it very explicit at the end of Eclipse? She says, you know, let's do it. And he said, not until we're married. Just flat out. All right, so let's talk about sex some more. To what extent is, you saw the Klaus Kinski, which seems to me the most, one of the most sexual quite appallingly so. Matt has just talked about the sort of poignant pre-sexuality of the 2 kids in Let Me In. In the scene that I showed, and I picked it partly for this reason, from Eclipse, she's in bed.
That actually was New Moon.
I'm sorry, New Moon.
But that's fine.
She's in bed. And at the end of the scene, it's she who pulls his face toward him for this big smooch. Stephen, in American Vampire, those women you know, are very busty, very décolleté. Noel, let's go straight down the line. To what extent is sex implicit? Oh, by the way, it is too in Bram Stoker's book, quite heatedly. But Victorian, so it's...
Well, look, let me break in here. The scene that you showed from Salem's Lot's an interesting scene because you have a male vampire who is obviously interested in sucking the blood of another man. The sex doesn't have anything to do with it. And it's interesting to me, in the first of the modern vampire books is a penny dreadful from England called Varney the Vampire, or The Feast of Blood, and the cover shows this leering guy. You'd cross the street on 43rd Street if you saw this guy, you know, because he's just that kind of guy, and he's got the cloak out, and the girl is in bed. And in Dracula, Dracula never enjoys any guy-on-guy action. It's always, Mina Harker, it's Lucy Westenra. He fixates entirely on the women. When Jonathan Harker's in the castle, the three weird sisters who Dracula has turned are on him like white on rice. You know, they're just there, and they want to get involved. Now, with American Vampire, there were two of us that worked on the book. There was Scott Snyder and there was me. Scott explained this whole thing to me about what he was going to do, and it's a long, complicated story, but basically I begged a ride on his machine. And so we were doing, in each one of the issues, we were each doing one story. Scott's story was about this young flapper named Pearl who works by day in a cafeteria, and at night she's an extra in movies, and she's really trying to break into showbiz, the silence. And she's living with a friend of hers, a woman friend, at a little cheesy apartment complex in somewhere in Los Angeles, which she calls Los Angeles because that's where it was then. And one of the guys who's hanging out is this guy that's on my shirt. It was Scott's concept that the vampire should look like this depraved Kurt Cobain. So that was what Raphael Albuquerque drew him to look like. And he's sort of hanging out by the pool and talking with these girls and chatting them up. But there's no sense, I didn't get any sense in the early issues that he had anything more in mind other than they're cute chicks, I want to talk to them. And later he develops a kind of protective thing toward Pearl, a little bit like Abby does in Let Me In. Mm-hmm. Abby, right?
Yes.
I said it right this time. I'm getting old. But in my story, where Skinner Sweet is it's the origin story. He's a cowboy, an outlaw in the Old West, and he is killed and gets a drop of this evil Eurovamp's blood in his eye, and it eventually turns it. There is sex. There is a kind of a kinky sexual relationship in my story that covers a number of years up to the 20s, but it involves the sheriff, who's not a vampire, and a girl that's very young that he sees as his niece. So Peter Straub, who collaborated with me on the Talisman books, used to joke and say, Stevie hasn't discovered sex yet. But I had, barely. But the thing about it was, it doesn't always play into the part. But most of the vampire myths are pretty sexy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I think Let Me In, it supports in a very powerful way what you're saying. It's not indispensable. Also, a lot of vampire myths are about the spread of disease, and it doesn't necessarily have to be sexual disease, because it's more about the kind of multiplication of bodies. Well, in Salem's Lot, I mean, there's this whole idea that it's spreading and it will take over the world.
Well, there's actually a website for, the passionate fans of Let the Right One In, the novel and the Swedish film, and the name of the site of the forum is We the Infected. And the idea was that when you were bitten, it was an affliction. And this is something, certainly in the story, the idea of becoming a vampire is something, you would never want because...
And it's an addiction metaphor, too.
Yes.
Yeah. That's certainly very strong in the Bram Stoker novel, that, that Minna and Lucy are infected, and at least Minna gets out of it, but poor Lucy has to undergo.
In the Herzog film you showed, remember some of the most haunting images of when people were just carrying coffins through the street. Everyone is dying.
Yes, and also in that scene, I believe, there's a huge infestation of rats.
Yes.
I can't remember what city it was.
Bremen.
It's really just flooded with rats. So that leads me into another question for you, Noel. You said in your book that the a crucial ingredient of horror is not just fear but disgust.
Yeah, I think that you're afraid in lots of different kinds of films and fictions and novels. What makes something horror is that you have a blended emotion, that it's fear and disgust. And the disgust is generally caused by something impure, either about the creature itself or what's around it, like the slime that's oozing off of it, or the rats that are surrounding it. And one real crucial source of feelings of impurity is when you get this category jamming, this categorical violation. So you have things that are living and dead, for example. And I think that the disgust comes along with what actually draws us to horror, which is fascination. Fascination that the laws of nature or the world are not the way our mind, our conceptual scheme maps it. There's a violation, and that's fascinating. But the other part of that is once you've got the violation, you also have this potential for disgust. So I think of it as kind of cause-benefit analysis. Disgust is what you're paying for the fascination.
Stephen, you mentioned cowboys, and you're not the first one who's made the connection. There's a wonderful vampire movie by Catherine Bigelow of Hurt Locker.
Oh, yeah. Near Dark.
Near Dark. And it's not as much cowboy, it's sort of trailer trash vampire. But it is cowboy. They have
the great line in that movie is when Lance Henriksen says, "The last sound you hear on your way to hell is going to be your guts snapping like garters."
That's awesome.
It's poetry, right? Come on.
But what is the idea of combining the cowboy, as on your T-shirt, with the vampire? Yeah.
Well, it wasn't my idea per se. It was Scott Snyder's who conceptualized this, and it was really brilliant. He saw a chance to use the vampire, I think, as almost partly as a witness to American history, because the vampire never gets any older. Skinner Sweet, it's like Abby saying, "I've been 12 for a long time." Skinner Sweet has been 28 for a long time. He's 28 when he dies. About that anyway, and he's 28 when Pearl meets him in 1922, and Scott is now working on a gangster thing featuring Las Vegas, and Skinner Sweet will still be 22 because the vampire doesn't age. So it becomes a window on history, but in a symbolic way or a metaphoric way, it also becomes a way of saying the vampire can be a symbol of American rapaciousness. That's the nice thing about all these monsters, all these horrible creatures. They're dreams, and like dreams, they all have something underneath the surface that we're afraid of, or something that we want to talk about, and maybe we don't want to talk about it in words right out straight, but it's there, and so I thought it was a terrific concept. When American Vampire starts, Skinner Sweet has been taken prisoner by the Pinkertons. But the Pinkertons are working for this cabal of European vampires who are buying up all this land, and they're going to flood out all these towns. So they're basically in it for the money as well as the blood. I mean, if you're going to have it, you might as well have it all. That's the American way.
But also that connects with the ranchers versus the farmers, right?
Yeah.
And the cowboy.
I don't think we ever got into that, but we did get into the businessmen versus the bloodsuckers. That's pretty American.
You made a distinction?
Not much.
With artists, sometimes you find this out in an interview and sometimes you don't. There's usually a point, and it may be a low point, when the artist receives the thunderbolt, the coup de foudre. And you mentioned King Kong, and you said you were about 7?
9.
9. Was that the moment? What is your memory of the first horror movie?
The first time that I got scared, I mean, as far as I go, it doesn't have anything to do with vampires. It's when the woods caught on fire in Bambi.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and then Bambi's dad got shot, or mom, I can't remember which, but one of them got shot, and it was dad,
Mother.
because then mom says, man has been in the forest. And I went, yeah. So the Disney pictures are scary as shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
They all are.
Yeah, it's true. That's, I think, if you believe Bruno Bettelheim, the Disney people were helping us practice certain things.
Sure.
Noel, for you, was it, you've written a very eloquent essay on King Kong. Was it King Kong for you?
It was probably King Kong, but yeah, because in New York we had this program called $1 Million Movie. Mm-hmm. You could see it every night of the week and 3 times on Saturday and 3 times on Sunday, and I saw it every time. So that was my really important early horror film. The first vampire film I remember on this program called Chiller Theater. I had to argue with my parents to let me watch it because it was at 11 at night. And finally they let me see it. I had been lying to all my friends that I had been seeing all of the other ones before. But it was Son of Dracula with Lon Chaney, in which he comes to Louisiana and his name is Count Alucard, which is Dracula spelled backwards. And I think that's what led me to become a literary critic.
So, Melissa, how about it? What was yours?
Specifically about horror, or?
Yes, horror. Let's keep it with horror, because these boys talked about King Kong, and that's not a vampire. But
I'll go with you on the Disney stuff. Fantasia was.
Oh, yeah, the brooms that wouldn't stop.
Night on Bull Mountain.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Shit, I forgot that.
I would say also the Rite of Spring section with the dinosaurs. It's pretty frightening.
I just remember the brooms. And,
yeah.
And also, I accidentally watched a piece of The Exorcist. And I saw this much of it, and that has stayed with me for 4 years.
Luckily, I didn't see it until I was an adult.
Yeah.
And then I could say things like, they can't turn their head like that. But when you're young.
When the bed starts, and now...
I had the same experience. I still can't, to this day, if someone shows me an image of Linda Blair in her Reagan McNeil getup, and you're not preparing me, I freak out. J.J. Abrams, when we were kids, we met when we were 13. That movie, my father took me to when I was young, and he was watching it fighting the devil, and I was horrified. And so he didn't notice that I really wanted to leave. And I closed my eyes at the moment you're talking about. That bed moment is one of the scariest things in cinema. And I filled in the rest of the movie from what I imagine it must have been based on what I think is one of the scariest soundtracks of all time. And I remember that when JJ and I became friends, he had struck up a friendship with Dick Smith, who's amazing, was an amazing makeup artist, and actually had the tongue from The Exorcist. He had all these great magazines. And he turned to me and he went, bleh. And I went, oh, don't do that.
But what was the beginning for you?
Well, that's the one that affected me the most. But the truth is that I am a horrible scaredy cat. I mean, I was scared. I mean, it's funny because usually, I just remember as a kid going to Disneyland and not being able to open my eyes on the Pirates of the Caribbean ride. Like there was that skull, dead men tell no tales, and I was like, okay, let me out. So.
But I know people who are great lovers of horror movies, who nevertheless can look at events in a horror movie. I remember specifically in one movie about the babysitter in the creepy house, she's going upstairs and the stairs go creak, creak, creak. Actually, it was used in Salem's Lot. He's coming down the hall, and there's a creak, creak, creak. You don't know what it is until later you realize it's the rocking chair in which the nefarious guy is rocking. But in any case, some people who still love horror movies can look at the convention and say, it'll be interesting to see how this convention is used.
They can have a distance.
Exactly, of the babysitter going up the stairs, which has, how shall I say, been seen before. For me, when the babysitter goes up the stairs, I'm terribly frightened of what's going to happen to the who's upstairs.
Yeah.
Actually, sometimes I feel as though I've been through something really terrible.
I have the same thing. The clip you just showed from Salem's Lot, just that guy's face. I was like, I have problems. Yeah. I'm still reacting. It's ridiculous. And it's funny because the fun of making them is that when you make them, you explore it and you get that side of yourself, but then you don't actually experience that horror.
You're in charge.
Yeah, it's very different. And in fact, that's one of the good things about making horror movies is it's much less scary than watching them for me.
One thing that's very interesting in Let Me In is the speed with which she attacks. It's very horrifying. You saw it in the tunnel scene very, very briefly. But for example, in the two clips that I showed at the beginning, the one of Klaus Kinski as Nosferatu, and in Dracula, when there is an attack, well, number one, you never see the moment of contact. This is 1931. But also he goes down very slowly. But this is...
Which is horrifying.
Yes, of course, it's very horrifying. Yeah. But also, Ellie, is it Abby?
Abby, yeah.
Abby.
Ellie in the suite.
Yeah. Ellie is fantastically fast, which is also horrifying.
Sure.
Extremely horrifying. You feel as though, you know, that this thing is out of nature, that it's beyond nature.
Well, there's something about the uncanny. There's something about what we were trying to do was take something, like much of that is actually Chloe Moretz, who's incredibly physical, up to a point, and then we've handed off to computer animation. And my attempt was actually to make it within the impossible as naturalistic as possible. In some places we were able to pull that off. In some places it looks probably even less like nature than I would have hoped for based on our budget. But the idea is to somehow tap into that uncanny where you're seeing something and then something completely illogical happens. And the Klaus Kinski thing, I mean, that kind of slow movement is so... It's completely unnerving.
But it's really, the music of it is amazing because it's very slow. But then when he makes contact with it.
You know, monsters are getting faster.
Yeah.
28 days after 30
Oh my God, that is incredibly
And I think there's a reason for it, because if you look at the old monsters from the 30s, they're very slow. And it's very hard to imagine how anyone could ever catch them. I mean, when Frankenstein or the Mummy comes, or
Folks, the mummy's after us. Let's all shuffle a little faster.
And Bela Lugosi is coming down. So I think it's good that they're getting faster.
Well, you know, it's good, but at the same time, I like, you know, there's something about that inexorable movement. It's like I could come back 10 minutes later, he's still coming.
Right.
And so it's not, there's something about the slow movement that I find just as horrifying.
We have a real argument about that. George Romero did Night of the Living Dead, and they're the original, you know, slow guys. And then Zack, what's his name?
Snyder.
Zack Snyder did the remake of the Mall movie, Dawn of the Dead. And so there are purists who want the slow, and there are new guys. It's like old classic Coke versus new Coke.
Yeah.
Slow zombies versus fast zombies. But, you know, in the vampire thing, and the zombies, and they're basically, we're talking undead. They're just different flavors of undead.
Yeah.
They have different taste buds. But Bill in True Blood is a very speedy vampire. He just buzzes around, man.
Yes. Yeah. No, he's quite fast.
Steroids.
Man, I want to ask you the same question I asked Melissa, which is that you were adapting something.
Yes.
And you made an extremely important change from Sweden to the United States.
To which are you referring? The country.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, yes.
And there were other changes that I noticed. There were certain bizarre qualities to Let the Right One In. The lady with the cats.
Yes.
It seems to me you stream. Well, let me stop saying. You say.
Well, my attempt. The thing that I identified is that the thing that Stephen was just saying is to me exactly the appeal of genre is that you know, on the surface, you get to do something that's about something wonderful and ridiculous, a giant monster or vampires. But under it, it's about something that you connect to, that's real. You're smuggling in something like Carrie. I mean, that was the thing. We looked at that a lot in the making of the film, just because that idea of that sort of that moment of that brutal adolescent existence and finding this sort of way to express your rage. And I just really connected to, in the novel and in the Swedish film, this story about that coming of age, and that this was this perfect metaphor for the horror of adolescence or pre-adolescence. And so what I wanted to do was to take the story even more so, because the thing about it is when you read Lindquist's book, it's enormous, and it changes point of view from character to character, from scene to scene. And I wanted to focus it in because in a 2-hour movie, as opposed to making the 10-hour miniseries,
yes,
I wanted to focus on that coming of age. And so I tried to filter all of it as much through his eyes. And I actually turned him into a bit of a voyeur. And I wanted him to look out into the world of adults, but use that as a way to see those subplots. So the cat lady becomes his neighbor and starts to represent a view of coming of age. And he's looking at her because he finds her sexually attractive, even though he doesn't understand what that means exactly yet. And he sees them arguing the way his parents must have been arguing before they got their divorce. And so in a way, I did try to streamline, but really about point of view, about trying to put you as much as possible through that idea of his coming of age. And that's how I tried to deal with it. In fact, even the subplots that I took, like the policeman that Elias Koteas plays, that's in the book. And I also thought it was quite American. You couldn't have a sort of town where serial killings were occurring, where the police wouldn't say, well, what's happening? But for me, what he really represented was there's a kind of Romeo and Juliet sort of ill-fated, you know, kind of like tragic, fated love story. Yeah, star-crossed lovers. And the idea was that as he kind of got closer and closer, you knew that fate was approaching. It was sort of slow, inexorable movement.
I wish we could tell them, but we can't. It only opened on Monday, but the ending is quite thoughtful. And
to me, the
just
ending of that
approach
book,
the box office and say, "Let me in."
Yeah, there you go.
They have to say
Wait, can we quote that?
Yeah.
You talked about the apartment. By the way, the voyeur thing, I don't remember from the Swedish movie, the boy with his ear.
He wasn't.
Okay, because you just saw that in the trailer, and it's pretty tough. I wonder if there's a class dimension. As I said, Dracula is Count Dracula, and the beginning of the aristocratic Dracula, which is 1819, by John Polidori, is the first time we get an aristocratic opera cloak type vampire. But now it seems to me that tell me if I'm wrong, most of the convincing vampires are working class.
Or
I'm thinking of you.
Near dark, they're unemployed.
But Stephen,
kind of Manson's kind of guy.
Yeah.
Stephen, everything I've read in the horror genre by you, and I may be an unrepresentative sample, is working class.
I don't know about the aristocracy, so I read about.
No, but there's such a thing as the upper middle class. It doesn't.
I don't know about them either. Really, so.
Melissa, in your screenplay, I think it makes a difference. One of the reasons I chose that scene was that it got Charlie in, the father, who's seems
terrific, by the way.
Yes, but so touching, that man, bewildered, caring. You're grounded for life. She says, okay, but her father's a cop. In both these stories, the parents have split up, and in yours, the mother's an alcoholic, or starting to be. Families under stress and broken up. There's lots of naughty business going on in Salem's Lot. Wives cheating on their husbands and so forth.
It's Winesburg, Ohio, with vampires.
Yes. That,
I thought it was subtext.
But I thought to myself, reading Salem's Lot, that there's a real Peyton Place aspect to it.
Right.
Like, ooh, what goes on underneath the respectability of this little,
Yeah. It hits the gutter and bounces lower.
That's also in Under the Dome.
Yeah.
I mean, that's very constant in your work.
Well, it's small town life. I mean, everybody's got secrets, and everybody spreads these things around, and that's the kind of vampirism in itself. I mean,
Yeah.
it's the way we roll.
And also the function of gossip and, you know, living close together. He can listen to the wall. He can see the lady crossing the courtyard. And, of course, one needs that. One needs one's characters to have information about the other characters' react to. Questions. But you must come down the aisle to one of there are mics at the end of each aisle. And please speak clearly.
I had a question about the use of the cross to protect oneself from the vampire, to destroy the vampire. And I've also read about the use of garlic. So I wondered if someone could comment about methods to protect yourself from a vampire or to destroy the vampire.
Noel, why don't you catch that?
Well, the cross doesn't always work. If you saw Polanski's Fearless Vampire Killers, a cross is held up and the vampire says, "Sorry, I'm Jewish." So, so don't rely on the cross.
Since the 19th century, the recipe is stake through the heart, beheading, and then burning. You can do any one of them, but
Stuff the mouth with garlic.
yes, and that's right, and garlic also keeps them away.
And then saute very slowly
Yeah.
over a low grill.
But ideally, you should do all of them. And actually, one of the most horrific moments in Bram Stoker's Dracula is when her fiancé is forced to drive the stake through her undead heart.
I think actually the most common, though, at least as I count it, is to get them in the sunlight somehow. Like
Yes.
to blacken the windows and then open it up and go, ha ha.
But mind you, all of this is very inconsistent, and it can even be inconsistent within the work. Dracula and Bram Stoker, Harker first discovers what the deal is when he sees him in the cellar in a coffin. That's why they're in coffins. But when Dracula gets to London, he walks around the streets in broad daylight with a straw hat on.
By the way, garlic doesn't work in New York.
Yeah, please.
For Stephen King, Salem's Lot was such an important early work of yours. How do you feel about that book now? That you've read it and 30 years have passed and more vampires have come along, and you brought one of its characters into your opus, the Dark Tower series. How do you see that work now?
I still like it. I mean, they're like Bela Lugosi says, they're my children of the night. What music they make, I still like that book very much. But then that's me.
It's for Melissa. How did you deal with writing the script for Breaking Dawn, because it's such an extreme book compared to the others, with the wedding and Renesmee, and yes, I'm a big fan. So I just wanted to, and is the script finished already?
The scripts are sort of, they're finished when the film is in the can. Cut, you know, when it gets on screen, that's when the script is finished, because there's always rewriting. But the heavy lifting is done, and we're prepping now. But it was a very difficult, it was the most difficult of all of them to adapt. Mostly, one, because of just the sheer size of it, but mostly because of the politics of it. It's interesting because Stephanie and I come from very, very different worlds, and it's sort of amazing that we've worked as well together as we do. I consider her a friend, and but you know, she's very openly devout Mormon, and I'm a very openly rabid feminist lefty. And so there's, you know, from these two just wildly different ways of being in the world, this book, for those who don't know it, is really a lot of her beliefs have come out very front and center. And I couldn't adapt that and in that aspect of it and stay true to my own beliefs. So it was a very, it was really about paring away from both of our points and finding the common ground. And that is tricky. It's very tricky because, I wouldn't do anything to violate her beliefs any more than I'd want to violate my own. So, choice is the issue. And, that's one I won't violate, so.
Please.
Yeah, this is also for Melissa, and I think a little bit about what you were just talking about. I'm a huge fan of Dexter, and I like the movies much more, or Twilight, than the books.
Oh.
And because, what you were saying before, I just find her such an unlikable character and so kind of boring, in the books. And that she's just...
Bella?
Yeah. Because she just always, I don't get why she has to be so clumsy and she's always tripping. That just bugs me. And also, I don't find Edward very appealing in the books because they're always talking about how he's cold and like marble. It's like, ew, but in the movies he's Robert Pattinson, so. But anyway, I just wondered, I think she's such a bad friend. She just doesn't care about anybody but Edward. So, but anyway, I just wondered how you dealt with that, like to make her a much more likable.
Well, I actually I loved the aspect in the book of her clumsiness. I think one of the something Stephanie's done, she's created this character who's very relatable. And I think that's part of the appeal of the storytelling and the books is that she's the audience's way in to this other world. So it's an every girl and every person who, suddenly attracts the attention of this, Adonis. And so it's the fantasy of it. And so she's made her this very flawed, real character. But again, for a film, it's very different than a book. And it was always about just keeping her moving the story forward and keeping her strong. And, that was, it's all kind of in the book. It was just kind of, this book is this and the movie is this. And so, it was really kind of paring away and condensing and.
Well, I think that's one difference between a movie and a book, right? And I think a difference between a movie and a movie, in your case, it seems to me that it's more direct and focused.
In my case, I just try to focus particularly on that sort of point of view, that plot line. But that if you look at the novel, which actually Lindqvist adapted himself for the Swedish film, that's why I think he even held on to a bit more of those sort of subplots.
That's what I'm saying.
He would have loved to have done, I think, if he could, all of them.
The guys in the coffee shop or the bar
absolutely.
And stuff. And as I said,
what's the difference in the running time between the Swedish?
It's the same.
Wow.
Cool.
Please.
This question is for Mr. King and the panel, in case you don't want to brag. I was just curious about Salem's Lot. We saw black and white films, and then your book. Was there stuff in between, or were you a vampire revival? I just don't know about the 40s, 50s, 60s. Was there...
During the 40s or 50s? Or
by my memory, were you in our modern, in most of our memories, were you one of the earliest...
Well, nobody had written any vampire novels for a while, and when the book was published, nobody wanted to come out and say on the flap that this was about vampires because they were afraid nobody would read it at that time, and nobody really had any interest in that sort of thing. I came along at a very fortunate time. There had been a book called The Other, published by Thomas Tryon, and The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, and I think maybe that's part of why they took a chance on me, but vampires at that point seemed really, really out there. So they just talked about The Stranger in Town. I wanted to kind of like do the other end of Dracula. Dracula's a detective novel, and Stoker was totally amazed, and he just loved all these scientific methods. There's blood transfusions in Dracula. They're kind of funny. In a way, he would have killed everybody because there's no typing involved or anything. But there's a guy keeps a phonograph diary and stuff. So
yes, typewriters.
Typewriting. That's what Mina is. She's a typewriter. That's her job. And so, in a way, it seemed to me that what Stoker was saying was we can destroy all these old superstitions with these modern sciences. And when I sat down to write Salem's Lot in the early 70s, I thought, well, all the sciences are wonderful, but we're choking on our atmosphere, and everybody's got nuclear weapons, and really, this is the end. This is where technology gets you. And I kind of wanted to do the other side of it, where the vampires would win a little bit.
Does that mean in 1 minute? All right.
Okay, this is a question I don't think any of you have had anything to do with, but do you know did you know the series called Moonlight that was on television?
Yeah.
And I wondered why it was canceled. Was it bad, or I loved it? And I wondered if it was just the bad timing of that. It was a few years ago, and maybe vampires were not that important on TV. And would it ever come back?
I don't think Moonlight's coming back. The lead of that is now in Hawaii Five-0, so he's working. And I mean, it always comes down to ratings. It always comes down to ratings. So the bottom line is, if people weren't watching, it gets canceled. And so
it's 2 years old, maybe that, or 3 years old, maybe wasn't in the trend by then.
no, it was. I mean, Twilight was out, and I don't think True Blood was out yet, but. Yeah, it was in the trend.
That's why I asked.
It was important to a lot of people. I had a lot of very devoted fans.
Well, all right, thank you.
One thing on
Dark Shadows.
I know that's what I was
That's
thinking
just
about.
what I was going to say. One that hasn't been mentioned, and also in response to this other lady, what was going on in the 50s and 60s. Dark Shadows was very, very popular in the 60s. And I've also...
There was Hammer.
What?
Hammer Films.
The Hammer Films with Christopher Lee from the 50s. And then, I don't know in what relation right now, because I'm supposed to be tying this up, but let's not forget Buffy, the Vampire Slayer, which was something of a dud as a movie, and then a fantastically popular TV series in the 1990s.
One of the best television series, I think, on the air.
Yeah, it's great.
The writing on that was just...
Yes. Also Buffy is very witty, which is sort of wonderful in a vampire movie. I love the irony at the end of the scene in Salem's Lot that, as I said, the guy escapes a vampire and then has a heart attack. Thank you all very much.